the Talent Experience podcast featuring authentic conversations on the future of work.
Empowering you to better understand and deliver a best-in-class, future-proofed career experience.
For more insightful conversations, visit talentexperiencepodcast.com.
We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Talent Experience podcast. I'm your host, Rhonda Taylor. Today, we're looking into the crystal ball. Hey, this is so exciting, looking into the future of HR with my guest, Andy Spence. Andy, who is from the UK, is a workforce futurist who works hands-on with boards, CEOs, and CHROs around the world. I love this. He did his master's back in 1996 on AI, and that was his focus. And my goodness, was AI even around? We got to talk about that, Andy. He now is focusing more on blockchain, and he was talking about blockchain before it ever became a buzzword. Today, we're speaking about the impact of blockchain in the HR community, a topic that is evolving globally. Andy, welcome to the Talent Experience podcast. Did I miss anything?
No, Rhonda, it's great to be here, and thank you very much for asking me. Well, that's a flash from the past. Yes, there weren't many courses on AI back in the 90s, and I was learning these programming languages. And then I ended up, my first job was programming electricity board computer programs, that were 20 and 30 years old. So I was brought back into the real world rather quickly back then, but it was interesting.
Yes, well, nobody knew what AI was back then, and like you're right, you would have been right back sitting in a desk doing COBOL and things like that.
Yeah, I was doing COBOL for a year, and never again. It stopped my computer programming career. I said, I'm not a coder, no way.
Andy, there's so much hype around Bitcoin. How can we in HR relate this hype to the world at work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. When you think of blockchain, a lot of people, their first reaction is Bitcoin, and they'll have a view. They'll regret not buying it 8 years ago and buying a Ferrari. That's the first reaction. But blockchain is a rather boring technology behind Bitcoin. We were talking about the world of distributed databases. And blocks of data and how they approve transactions. So on the face of it, it's rather boring. And, compared to AI, blockchain doesn't talk to you. It's not like a 3D printer where you can build your own house. It's a bit more mundane. But I think of all the emerging technologies, I think blockchain will have a profound impact over the next 10, 20 years as we build probably what I'd call the next generation of the internet.
Yeah. And, how long do you think this scenario will take to build out?
Yeah, and your question was around HR and work, how it relates to that. Well, when I first started researching this a few years ago, and I blogged openly about it, and it was like, how could we use this technology in HR and work? Well, it made me actually think a little bit about all the checking and contracting and searching we have to do in HR. And blockchain can actually help change the whole infrastructure of work. And if we think of our data, how we apply for jobs in North America with our resumes and CVs, the resume was invented by Leonardo da Vinci in the 15th century when he applied for a job as a military engineer with the Duke of Milan. And we're still using this old document. And so how does blockchain might help? For example, it might be that we've got a digital wallet that where we can actually store a credential that verifies that we've got a degree certificate. And the verification happens with a network of universities and colleges who we trust, okay? So we get a green tick to say that Andy has a degree in AI, for example. And that makes the whole checking, verification, and trust in this for this one credential much more efficient. So you can imagine we could extend that to people's employment record. Did you work at Walmart for those 2 years, for example? We can verify that. We get a green tick. So rather than sending around these dubious applications, we've got a digital wallet. We can store it, we can manage it, we can choose who we share it with, and it makes the whole matching process much more efficient. So that's where it's bang into the space of traditional HR.
That is so in line with the way we are thinking, and especially with your skills that you're developing in the workforce. They can be validated either by your supervisor or by a peer or by, if it's a certification program that you took. The way of identifying skills and capabilities are numerous, and that too can go into your wallet, I guess.
Yeah, it can do. Anything that can be verifiable or digitized. And of course, we're not talking about these technologies in isolation. Let's throw in all this data. We'd have to throw in our AI and artificial intelligence. And when it comes to recruitment, for example, there might be hundreds of possible data points that would help you predict whether an individual is going to work out well in a particular team. Hundreds of data points in a dynamic system. And so AI is going to come into its own when we can look at, which of those data points help predict whether a hire is going to be successful or not. And of course, that needs a different infrastructure of work. It needs us to have good quality data, and it needs us to record subsequent performance of individuals and teams, all of which we're a bit away from. But I see technology developing along these lines, and it gives more power to the worker and more confidence to the employer that this hire and this team are going to work out.
And this methodology allows everything to be more global. When you think of it. Now, in the old days, Andy, I can remember recruiting and putting an ad in the paper and hoping to get somebody to take the position. And, we suffered from tunnel vision back then. We thought, oh, well, we're recruiting in Toronto. We want somebody in the Greater Toronto area applying for this job. And such is the case. This is not the case anymore.
No.
The workforce is global, and it's amazing that we do, as you say, we need to collect the data and have it, as you say, in a digital wallet.
Yeah, I mean, you did right. The workforce is not only global, but also has 24/7 quality entertainment streamed to them. There's many different ways to learn and earn money, right? You don't just need to earn money from the one job you do and work Monday to Friday. You could earn money from your gaming prowess, from your selling your oil paintings and earning crypto, for example. There's so many examples of how to earn in different ways. So I think that's really fascinating. So the workforce is changing. But Rhonda, you mentioned something that really sort of stood out for me, and it's the history of technology, right? So let's take recruitment. So when the internet arrived, we got our paper application forms and we put them onto the internet. So the paper application form had 50 fields, and we put all 50 fields onto the internet on a form. It was pretty ugly and not very user-friendly. Then mobile came along, and we took our online form with maybe 20 fields, and we tried to fix it into some kind of mobile app. And again, it wasn't very convenient for filling in as you're going to work on the bus or train, right? And so we learned that, we only wanted 3 or 4 clicks to keep people's attention. And it's the same when I do talks about blockchain to HR. People are saying, "Great, Andy, how do we put our payroll on the blockchain?" But it's the wrong question. I think the way to think of blockchain is it's enabling different people to form teams, to create smart contracts where they can share the equity from the video they've made, from the music they've made, from the artwork they've done, all this kind of thing. And so it's enabling people to form teams, to share equity, and to work together in very different ways. So it's much more complex than just taking our old processes from the last 100 years and making them more efficient on blockchain. That's the wrong way to look at it. We need to rethink work. And that's what I'm kind of passionate about.
Wow, this sounds so futuristic. What applications can we use today to learn more about blockchain? And where can we learn more about it?
Oh, gosh. So I think don't get distracted by all the Bitcoin crypto investment hype, right? So I think that's the first thing. Look a little bit deeper, but also don't bother going into all the maths and the cryptography. Again, that's a bit of a distraction too. When I started looking at it, it was Don Tapscott, another Canadian, Rhonda, who prompted me to write a paper about blockchain in HR. And what we did is we looked at the existing industry, we looked at centralization, who owns the data, and the business models around it. And so that's the way to look at it. It's looking at how we use career data. But your question was, how do you actually experience this new technology? Well, one way is, our internet browsers. So, we've got the Google browsers, for example, are fantastic, but we give something up. For a great service, we actually give them data about ourselves that is then sold to advertisers, to companies like Google who sell that data. Similar model with LinkedIn, right? So somewhere like, there's a browser called Brave, the Brave browser. And so you browse the internet and you choose the level of adverts you're willing to accept in a month, right? And if you actually click on a car advert or something like that, you get tokens, which are called BAT tokens. And these tokens can be exchanged for Bitcoin or US dollars or whatever. So you're getting paid for your attention, actually. So that's quite interesting. It turns the existing model around a little bit. Other ways you could earn crypto, there's something called Rabbit Hole, where you can actually do small tasks and give your time and attention in exchange for crypto tokens. And you mentioned HR, right? So when I started writing about this, there were just maybe 10 startups in this space. But now the industry incumbents, all the big players, are investing in this blockchain technology. And one way is through the non-profit Velocity Foundation, which is a lot of the industry incumbents are involved in this, and they're producing interoperable digital career wallets. I think they call it the Internet of Careers. And this is almost like a system where we'll be able to exchange information as we move between jobs, right? So check out the Velocity Foundation. Look at what the different tech vendors and staffing vendors are doing. Get involved in pilots. And so that's how, it's going to affect our industry. Get involved. It really needs HR people to get involved, right? Because HR has a lot of knowledge about people, teams, organizations, and these processes, and compliance and the law. It's really important HR gets all over this, Rhonda, because it's going to impact all our lives in the next 10, 20 years.
And speaking of the future, how do you see people management playing out in the next 5, 10, let's go 15 years?
Well, because we, to be fair, we have talked about technology over the last 20, 30 years. So looking into the future. So with my research with Don, we started to say, if we've got this world where we've got trustworthy digital credentials, it's a world with a lot more platforms where we can actually match workers with employers or people giving work, right? And in that scenario, doing a project, a task, or a contract becomes a lot more seamless and efficient. So we're going to get more churn, people moving around a lot more. In that scenario, organizations don't need to have 300,000-400,000 people on their books. They can just pull from a lot of skills when they need them, right? So we're going to get loads of churn, smaller organizations, and people moving around a lot more. And so that's kind of, there's some hypotheses I'd throw out there. And I think that becomes fascinating. And in that scenario, it depends where you're sitting. In some countries, you're saying to yourself, well, people will starve. It will become a race to the bottom if we've got all these people competing with each other on platforms. But what needs to happen is an associated response from regulators, policymakers, and governments, so that we have the associated minimal levels of welfare and financial security needed for people to be able to move around so flexibly. I think we're going to see these kind of trends in the future. So there's great benefits for workers in that scenario. I'm optimistic that people will find a way of making a living, becoming economically viable in that situation. And just throwing a fact towards the end of our conversation, there might be 3 or 4 billion people in the global workforce. 2 billion of those people are working in rather informal ways, right? And so what this new world enables, it's a digital world, enables people to become economically viable, to get income streams from all these different methods that we've mentioned. And that's a very positive thing, to include a more diverse workforce in the future. So that's what I'm optimistic about.
Yeah, and it's so, and we are seeing it evolving as I'm speaking. Like I have right now, I think I have like 2 great nieces out skiing in Whistler. You're just between assignments, and one of them had a really good job with the bank, and she just went to the bank and said, I either leave or I get 6 months, a 6-month leave. And the bank gave them a 6-month leave. It's, Andy, the older generation never ever thought of going and asking for that.
No, and you know what? It would be outrageous. When I was 30, not so long ago, I hear you all thinking. I had a performance review with my boss, right? And it was an annual performance review. He says, Andy, what do you really want? And I paused for a bit. I looked at him. I said, what I really want is to quit and see the world. I want to go traveling. I want to go to India and Australia. And we both had a bit of a laugh. He said, let's make it happen. And what I did, I took a year off. I went traveling, and they kept my job open. And it was quite a few years ago. And on my very first day back, I was waiting to go. It was a startup with about 1,000, well, not a scale up with about 1,000 people. I met our chief executive officer from the US for the very first time. And he said something like, where do you work? And I said, well, this is my first day back after a whole year. And he didn't know how to respond. He'd never heard of this. And I don't blame him. But, it was a great year for me, I must say. I was extremely lucky. But people are thinking about their lives in this way more and more. It's about lifestyle, money, time, health, and these are the important things.
And you're so right about the gig economy becoming regulated. In the past, and I'm talking, 10, 15 years ago, often the gig economy was an underground economy. But now, with major corporations jumping into gigs and everything, it's become totally regulated, and that's the future.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't think we're going to call it the gig economy. It's much more mainstream. It's how people are going to work. We're going to be on different durations of contracts with different pay. The technology goes in the background. It helps us enable this. And if we're looking to source work, if you're in HR and traditionally have been hiring permanent hires, if we need to source work, we've got 10 different options to think of now, including hiring teams, outsourcing, automating, using temps, permanents. There's a whole variety. And so it's about sourcing work more broadly. And so I agree, Rhonda, that we need to be really flexible and strategic about how we design work going forward, definitely.
So hypothetically, let me just recap. An employee of tomorrow is going to have an employment wallet or their HR file. And if they want a job or if they want an assignment or an opportunity, they would just send their link. And that's the way that they're going to start seeking employment. Is that
I think people are going to have their digital career wallets, like you described, and they will choose who they share that with. If somebody wants to go and see whether they do have a degree, or to check their ID, or even their personality scores, anything around data, they can choose who can see that verification. And what I would say, if you're starting out in your career and you've got a long career ahead of you, a long life ahead of you, then it's around collecting these verifiable credentials as you go along to demonstrate to future people who want to employ you and hire you around what you've done, what you've achieved, the skills you've achieved, that kind of thing. So yeah, and it won't just be around careers. I can imagine that it'll be around wealth and health and other aspects of our lives will be done in a similar way. Because of course, HR and work tends to lag behind some of the other industries. So we're going to see this in all different walks of life too, and it'll be the way we operate. We've got to move on from a situation where 5 big companies own most of our personal data and monetize it. It's not acceptable.
Right. Andy, we believe that everyone should enjoy their careers. You obviously are passionate about what you do. How do you stay at such a high level of performance?
Well, that is a good question. And I'm like anyone else, my performance tips. I don't have the old boss to give me my annual performance review. I'm my own boss. And so you've got to look after yourself in that respect. I wrote an article for my newsletter, Workforce Futurist, about well-being and preventing burnout, right? And I shared some of my personal things, which are around making sure you take time out, making sure that if you've got a day off, that you take for me, Twitter, LinkedIn, and email apps off your phone for a day. So you have a complete break, using flight mode at night, this kind of thing. And for people who work in the gig economy, and a lot of people have moved in recently, it's actually maybe taking a week off every quarter. And make sure you take your vacation holidays to maintain your health. So a lot of it's around keeping healthy and keeping the energy levels up and the curiosity up. You need to take those breaks and create buffers. In the lockdown, people found that a struggle because going to the office, working with teams in real life creates buffers. What time you leave and going for socials at work and things like that. So I think when you're kind of looking after that yourself, you've got to recreate some of these buffers. And that might be simple things like taking an hour lunch break, making sure you do your yoga, walk the dog, talk to the family, that kind of thing.
Andy, this conversation has been so enlightening, and it really has made me think a lot about the future and the employee of the future. I want to thank you for being part of the Talent Experience podcast today. This is Rhonda Taylor saying thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the future.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Talent Experience podcast.
For more talent experience and future of work conversations, visit talentexperiencepodcast.com.
Follow us on Twitter at TalentXPodcast.
Or join the conversation with #Talent Experience Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter.
The Talent Experience podcast was brought to you by the fabulous Fuelies at Fuel 50.